Bo and Luke Nation. That was a weird one, but we're going to roll with it. You're listening to the Bo and Luke Show. I'm your co-host, Luke Carignan.
And I'm your other co-host, Bo Brabo. And this episode is none other than Ty Pinkins. Ty Pinkins, he's an author. He is a newly graduated lawyer, if you will. Later in life, and he took on law school. We applaud him big for that. Not sure what his future holds, but he's going to let some people have it with his newfound law skills, I think.
It's going to be awesome.
He's going to be an awesome attorney for sure. Ty retired from the United States Army a few years ago as a chief warrant officer, and time at the White House serving as a presidential communications officer for President Obama. And, Ty's story is from the cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta to sleeping in the White House. That's the subtitle to his book, 23 Miles and Running. And it's just phenomenal. He's a phenomenal guest, phenomenal individual. We were honored to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, he's amazing. Such an awesome journey that he's about to tell us about.
Yeah, and listen in, folks, because Ty talks about his nonprofit group, which is very powerful, and what he's doing for kids. Him and his wife is incredible, and there's a way for you to get involved and get engaged and help out that organization. So without further ado, make sure you check out the Bo and Luke Show at www.theboandlukeshow.com. Send us feedback, put in a guest request, whatever you'd like to do. Find information on all of our guests, and all of our episodes are right there for you to listen to at your leisure.
Let's get after it.
Ty Pinkins, why don't you start us out with giving us a little bit of background about yourself before we get into the meat of what we're talking about today and what we're going to share with all of our listeners, whom we address as the Bo and Luke Nation. So who is Ty Pinkins?
Well, you know what? Well, first of all, I'm happy to be a part of the Bo and Luke Nation today and be on you guys' show. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome.
For inviting me in. But Ty Pinkins, me, I'm a son, a father, a brother, and a husband from Mississippi, from the Mississippi Delta, born and raised. Went off to college for a couple of years down in Jackson, Mississippi, and then took off to the military for about 21 years. And I think that's where our paths slightly crossed somewhat when we
they did.
Yeah, but did that for about 21 years. And then after I left the military, I decided to go to law school on the GI Bill. Finished law school, just graduated here last month, month and a half ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations, man.
Thanks a lot. And getting ready to head back down to Mississippi.
And so
Are you really?
Where'd you graduate law school from?
Georgetown. Georgetown.
Like
3 years of hell.
Like one of the most elite law schools in the world, man. Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
thanks
huge.
a lot. It's the largest law school in the world, with student population size. Yeah, it's a huge student body. I think we're ranked number 14 in the country now out of hundreds of law schools in the country. But it was an awesome opportunity, excellent opportunity.
Yeah, that is huge. That's a big congratulations, especially post Army career. Like you already had one profession, one career. Now you're writing a big new chapter of life that's coming next.
So Ty, if you don't mind me asking, I mean, we're a bunch of dudes here, so I guess like we don't get offended. But how old are you, man?
Man,
this is not a job interview, so we can.
When I started law school, people thought that I was in my 30s. And I was like, no, man, I graduated here last month at 46 years old.
Awesome.
I'm 46 and a half, man. I'll be 47 in January.
That's rocking it, man.
Congratulate listeners out there. Like, you tell yourself it's too late. Oh, you missed your chance when you were in your 20s. Give me a break.
Never too late.
Graduated
Never
from
too late.
Georgetown.
Those are excuses that people make, and that's the whole point. Ty, that's the whole point of our show, man, is to try and inspire people through our experiences, your experience, to say, man, it's not over till it's over.
Oh no.
And right? You just got to keep dreaming, keep going.
As long as you can dream, you got a point to get to. You have somewhere to go. When I like to tell my kids and some of the youth that I mentor is that you have to dream. And
Yeah.
when you have a dream or goal or something that you value, take that and put it in your pocket and don't let anyone take it from you. And just keep every day, take one step closer to that goal. As long as you move forward, whether that's 1 inch or 2 inches or a foot or a mile, as long as you take that one step, you're that much closer to it, and you will eventually get there. Just don't stop. And that's the same with attaining an education. It's always
Yeah.
there. You can go and get it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
It's
And I
amazing.
think for people listening, it's quite obvious that Ty is very humble because in introducing himself, I think he left a lot out of there. So he's an author. His book recently released called 23 Miles and Running, available on Amazon. And I want to read the subtitle because I think the subtitle is incredibly powerful to your journey. And quoting the title of the book, 23 Miles and Running, subtitle, My American Journey from Chopping Cotton in the Mississippi Delta to Sleeping in the White House.
Yeah.
Oh, that just sounds like there's a whole lot to say in between those two things.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's a
yeah,
lot in there, man. It's been a long, winding road,
yeah,
and from those dirt roads and cotton fields down in the Mississippi Delta to around the world with the Army, with the military, and through the White House and to
yeah,
law school. And to this point, it's been a long, long road.
yeah. You talk about in your book, one of the chapters, and I'm not going to give it all away because I really think people should buy it. They really should buy it and read it. And you're a super great storyteller. And one of the up front in the beginning, you're talking about growing up in poverty.
Mm.
So when you were young, did you have who influenced you? Who did you look up to? And did did you know then? Did you know then that you were in a poverty situation compared to I mean as a kid? And were
Mm.
you shielded from it? Were you in it? How did that all
Well,
feel back then?
regarding who I looked up to and whether I realized I was in growing up in poverty. I think it's all overlapping
Hmm.
because I look up to my parents, my mom and my dad, and we had a huge family growing up, cousins and brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. And there was at one point earlier in life, it was maybe 20 of us in one bedroom house,
Wow.
of cousins and uncles and grandparents and me and my cousins, we'd sleep on the floor, head to foot, on my grandmother's floor. But being that young and growing up, we had no idea how much we did not have.
Yeah.
Our parents, they worked to shield us from it. They did whatever they could do to give us what we needed, food and shelter.
Mhm.
And all the closeness of our family, I think, inoculated us from a lot of the just the abrasiveness, the racism, the
Yeah.
poverty, the stuff that was going on down in the Mississippi Delta. And we didn't realize until we got older what we didn't have. But looking back on it now, I wouldn't change anything because I think growing up in those circumstances, it definitely shaped who I am today and how I approach challenges, how I talk to other people, especially young people
Mhm.
who are growing up in similar situations. And I think you might be able to relate to it also, how I carry myself in the military, particularly being deployed,
Mhm.
growing up in tough circumstances like that made me approach challenges, tasks, missions in a certain way. But yeah, I would say my parents, they certainly shaped who I am, particularly my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. That's super good.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for
good
sharing that
stuff.
with us. Yeah.
Oh.
I actually just ordered your book right now. I haven't seen it. I've pulled it up in front of me. I'm looking at your old family photos right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are great. I'm glad you put photos in the book. It always helps bring the story to life.
Yeah, I wanted to give readers a picture of what I was talking about, the people, the places, and some of the experiences that I dealt with, or that we dealt with, because it wasn't just me. I'm not an anomaly or anything. It wasn't just me, but some of the situations that we were in. But overall, we had a huge, close knit, warm family
Mhm.
down in the Mississippi Delta on a little place called Elmwood, and we did everything together. We
Mhm.
played together. We slept together. Sometimes we bathed together.
Yeah, for sure.
you
I
know.
bet.
But those relationships that we had, especially with my cousins, those are bonds that are so tight today. Even though I've been out of Mississippi for nearly 20 years now, I
Mhm.
always maintain my residency though.
Oh, good for
Even
you.
today. So
Even today.
even
Awesome.
today. But no, it was an experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So so growing up and going through school and you said you started out in college and then you ended up joining the military. What prompted you, or what was in your mind, and what were you thinking when it came time to raise your right hand and enlist in the United States Army?
I didn't give it a lot of thought beforehand. I
Hmm.
had graduated from high school. I was the first to in my immediate family to graduate from high school. My dad, he left school in the 6th grade, and my mom, when she got pregnant with me, she left in the 9th grade, and they didn't return. And so I graduated, and they sent me off to Tougaloo College in Jackson, and I stayed there for about 2.5, maybe 3 years, and I was doing okay
Hmm.
in school, but I always felt like I wanted to do something different. I wanted to see something outside the boundaries of the Mississippi Delta. And
Yeah.
I was working at probably one of the worst things I did when I was
Hmm.
in college, and one of the best things at the same time. I was in my sophomore, the end of my sophomore year at Tougaloo,
Hmm.
and I decided to get myself a full-time job without having a car and go to school full-time. So, and then I decided to move out of the dorms and get an apartment. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Those are
So,
all big decisions.
yeah, all big bad decisions. But I got a job at this newspaper printing plant press, where they printed the sales paper for groceries,
Uh-huh.
food, in the Sunday paper. And I worked there, and my grades started to tremble a little bit, and things weren't working out. And I knew you made a mistake, buddy.
Uh-huh.
And so I met a Marine there. A Marine. He was a retired Marine, and he and I would talk, and he asked me, "What is it that you want to do?" Because he knew I wasn't really happy.
Hmm.
I was doing okay in college, but I wasn't really happy. And I said, "I want to travel the world." And he started to tell me about being stationed in Europe and being stationed in Asia, and being on the island of Okinawa, being stationed on Okinawa. And a few days later, I walked into a shopping mall in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I passed by all of these stores. And the first recruiter that I came to was an Army guy, and I walked in and we talked. And a few weeks later, he showed up in my parents' yard and
No
drove me
way.
away in a van. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah, my mom didn't even know I was leaving. So
Oh my
Really?
gosh.
they had no idea.
Wow.
None of my
Oh
friends
my.
knew I was leaving college. I just stopped showing up and then
And so
took
how
off.
old were you at this point?
I started college when I was 18, but I left Mississippi when I was 22, when I joined
Sure.
the Army. Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I can visualize that for sure. Yeah. It's time to go. Ty says,
Yeah,
time to pack up. Got to get out of here. I'm going.
yeah, and
U.S. Army, here I come.
that started a journey that I will never ever forget. And I remember when that Marine, because I gave him a fictitious name in the book,
Hmm.
but when he told me about Okinawa, I never imagined that my final tour overseas would be on that island in Okinawa, Japan, on the same island he was talking about.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always found some of the even the military guys that we've had on our show, when you start listening to their stories and how it all comes about,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it becomes a very small world
Mm-hmm.
and very similar experiences and how someone actually got to that point, and where even though we're stationed around the world,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many similarities, and it's pretty fascinating to me,
Yeah.
how it all transpires when you actually start hearing people's stories and
Yeah.
how it came to be.
I think people don't really pay a lot of attention to how Military members are just this conglomerate of people who come from these really small communities all over the country. I don't care if it's Iowa or Mississippi or Georgia or Washington State or Washington, D.C. We all come from these small communities, and people from the middle class, poor people from the upper middle class, and they come together to create this be a part of this organization, our military, which is an awesome organization. Absolutely, I can't say anything bad about my time serving our country. Absolutely loved every moment of it. But one of the things that I enjoyed most about it was meeting people from all over the place. Yeah, and meeting people that I didn't even realize I had already. I had experiences that were similar to theirs, and they could relate to things that I had gone through, or we had differing experiences. We always learn something from each other.
That's right.
Ty, I always love to really get to know our guests and find out like something, because first of all, by the way, you're an incredibly positive guy and you make everything sound so easy. But I know because I've lived through life that nothing's that easy. Tell me about some times when you should have quit or you just wanted to quit, right? What kept you going? Are there, because you didn't get to where you're at without just a ton of adversity.
I think the first time in my life where I thought about quitting was my first time chopping cotton.
I would quit that.
That's the hardest job I've ever had, and I include in that group of things, being in the military, deploying, anything. I've never had a more difficult job than chopping cotton. And the first day that I went into the cotton field, it was me and one of my cousins and some older men. They were, and I talk about it in the book, the men were like twice my age. I was only 13, 14 years old and hadn't hit my growth spurt. So we went out. My dad woke me up real early one morning because I told him I wanted a job. And he gave me a red baseball cap, a red farm cap when we were walking out the door. And we hop on the back of this old beat up truck and we drive several miles and we stop on this old dirt road. Early in the morning, the sun was barely rising and the grass on the ground was still wet with dew. So we entered the cotton field, and the cotton was, at that point I was short. The cotton was taller. So it was scraping the side of my face when I was walking down the field. And some of these fields are a quarter mile long, and the Mississippi sun is hot in the summer. And coming back, we made it one pass down the field and I hadn't eaten breakfast before I came out that first day. And so we're walking back on another row and I just start getting tired and I collapsed in the cotton field on my knees, and the older guys were continuing to walk because they didn't realize I had stopped. And that at that moment, that was the first moment in my life. And I remember at 13 or 14 that I just decided I wanted to stop. And one of the best things that happened that moment, and I carry it with me today, and I've carried it with me throughout my military career, throughout the deployments and into my mentorship program, is a guy reached down and grabbed my arm, and he tugged me. He said, "Get up." And then he said, "Get up." So keep walking, don't stop. And I did. And we made it to the end of the row. I got some water and I finished that day. But I always remember him telling me, keep walking, don't stop. And the way that I interpreted it and the way that I offer that advice to young people today, especially young people that come from difficult circumstances, is keep walking, don't stop. As long as you put that left foot in front of that right, if you do it enough times, you're going to hit the wall, and that wall is your destination. That's your goal. That's what you're trying to get through. All you have to do is just don't stop. So that was one of the more that was one of the times that I thought about giving up. And each time I faced the circumstance, whether that be during a deployment or working at the White House or even in law school, that voice, get up, don't stop, has always at some point came up and made me move forward through whatever task I was being faced with.
Wow. That's incredibly, it's incredibly powerful.
Mm.
Those are powerful moments in those times of adversity, and everything is fighting against you. Your body's fighting against you. Your mind is fighting against you, and everything, everything is telling you that I'm not going. This is it. And then
Yeah.
when you have that arm pull you up and give you that, what seems simple but is so powerful in the moment, and
yeah.
it's one person that had the wherewithal to do that for you.
Yeah.
And it was enough to get you up off the ground, and then you made it.
That's, that's one of the things that I appreciated about the military, from basic training all the way through warrant officer candidate school, through the NCO development courses, all the way through my military career. I appreciated being pushed to another limit, at each phase of my military career, being pushed somewhere where you have to make a decision whether you're going to either go left or you're going to go right. Are you going to give up, or are you going to believe in yourself? Yeah. And the military pushes you to make those decisions. It's a structured organization, but it pushes you to decide what are you going to do. And that's definitely one of the things that I appreciated about it.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. We could have that conversation all night long.
Yeah.
I agree completely.
Like the most incredible response I could have ever thought of. Like, I'm blown away right now. That's a great story.
Yeah. So Ty, how did you get to, so you went to the Warrant Officer Candidate School, and then eventually you ended up in the White House Communications Agency, where we almost, same unit, but we almost crossed paths there toward the end of my time, beginning of your time. How'd that all transpire? What was that experience like? And, tell our listeners what sleeping in the White House, meeting the president, working for the president. Yeah. How just awe-inspiring was that?
Oh, probably one of the most fascinating few years of my military career. I wouldn't say it was the most rewarding moment of my military career. The most rewarding moment was when I was actually serving with soldiers, just on the ground in a regular unit, being in that squad and watching people enjoy being successful. Whether that's a private or a sergeant or whatever, watching people just overcome adversity and lead themselves through situations. But regarding how I got to the White House, it was by chance. I was stationed in Okinawa, and I had maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years left in the military. And I knew that at that point, I knew I wanted to go to law school also. I just needed to figure out where I wanted to be stationed to end my military career. And so I was, my unit in Okinawa had sent me back to the United States, to Virginia, to do some training. And on my last day of training, I thought I didn't have anything. The training was over, and my last day being in Virginia, I didn't have anything to do. And I thought to myself, I've been in the military almost 20 years at that point, and I had never been to our nation's capital. I had never been to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So I hopped in the car and drove to D.C., did a little day tour, stayed there for a day, and I was driving back on the highway, and I had to stop and get some food. And I pulled over to a restaurant, and I finished my meal. And on the way out of the restaurant, I see a person sitting at the bar in the restaurant, just a random restaurant. And it was one of my best friends in the military for 20 something years, the entire time. We hadn't seen each other in 12 years. Wow. But here he was sitting in the same restaurant, and he was working in Washington. He was stationed in Washington, D.C. And he asked me, did I want to come? And of course, he was working he's working at the White House Communications Agency. And
who was it?
Link McCoy.
Oh, Link. I know Link.
Link, yeah. And he asked me, he told me he thought I'd like it. And he asked me if I wanted to do it. And he said he was working at the White House Communications Agency. And I told him, you know what? I'll think about it. Let's talk after I get back to Okinawa. In the back of my mind, I didn't want to. Yeah. Because I was comfortable. I was in a good place mentally, spiritually, emotionally, especially coming off my third deployment. I was in Okinawa, and I said, I need some time. I needed a break.
Yeah.
And so he called me when I got back to Okinawa, and he said, so did you decide what you want to do? And me being me, I said, no, I'm good. I don't want to work at the White House. I turned it down.
It's cool though, because he didn't drop it. He followed up.
Yeah, he
Give
did.
him credit.
And so a year passed, and he called me. Well, I called him back after a year. I had gotten some stuff together now, and he started laughing as soon as he picked his phone up, and he was like, "So you ready?" I was like, "You know what? Let's put in an application and see how it turns out." And I applied, and I got accepted, and went through the whole rigmarole. You went through the whole thing when you were getting interviewed to come there, and then I ended up getting accepted, and they flew me out to DC.
Nice. Guys, what's the interview process look like for the White House?
It's something.
It's a long interview process, and without going too deep into it, it involved them talking to people from when you were in middle school or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Neighbors from your hometown. Yeah.
Yeah, Luke. So think about it. So you being in, the staffing industry for a lot of years, right? And and you're talking on the civilian in the corporate world, and you do a background check on somebody, and that's nothing, right? It's an automated check, runs for a couple minutes, and they're done.
Yeah, it's like $50, right?
Yeah. Now imagine Ty being toward the end of his 20 years in the Army, and he's now in his early 40s. I would imagine you were probably about that age, right? 40, 42 or so?
About 40, yeah.
About 40. And you're asked, okay, we want to fill out this questionnaire, and it's every question applies to your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Go all the way back. Yeah, all the way back. Mm-hmm. Every question.
Wow. And then I imagine they call to verify and everything.
Oh yeah. And then it's one massive undertaking. And then of course the one that always gets you is the personnel suitability questionnaire, right? Which they're really getting super personal in that questionnaire.
Wow.
So, you know what happened when I was interviewing? There was an earthquake when they were interviewing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I was in Okinawa, and I don't know if they're FBI agents or whoever that they send to do the face-to-face interview, because they did a face-to-face interview, and they did a video teleconference interview with me with the people at the White House Communications Agency.
Right.
But before they did the video teleconference, they sent an FBI agent to Okinawa to interview me in my office there. And it was so funny. Before he got there, I was standing in a conference room there in the building, and the building starts shaking, and I'm this guy from Mississippi. I ain't never been in an earthquake, man. I'm like, what is going on here? So the building stopped shaking, and I walk around the corner and sit at my desk, and in through the door, a guy knocks on the door, and I say, come on in. In through the door walks a FBI agent. And I'm like, what? An earthquake? And then the FBI agent walks through my door to interview me. Blew my mind. I was like, what is this? What's going on?
Yeah, that's wild.
The FBI has shaking interview processes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never experienced an earthquake either. I would probably imagine the world was ending or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the Lord is coming back, and this is it.
So where do you here? I have a question. So where do you sleep in the White House? So I got a tour one time. It was the employee tour. A neighbor I used to live next to in DC named Jeff Rezick. Probably never ran into him. He's a good guy. He's a fine American. He had flat note cards he had taken and everything. Gave us the whole tour of the West Wing. I didn't see any comfy places to sleep. That's my question.
Well, you know what? Without going too far into it, and without breaking the non-disclosure agreement that Bo probably signed, also, I'll just say that there are places in there for people who work in the White House to sleep comfortably. So
That's just good. Leave it at that. That's good. There should be. There should be.
So when you started, Ty, did you come straight into obviously the Obama administration? Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you retired prior to the changeover, or when President Trump? Did you make that transition from President Obama to President Trump, or were you out before President Trump took over?
No, I made the transition, which I think is one of the things that I appreciate about being. I think it was a unique opportunity to be there. when President Obama was president, and then see the whole transition and be there for several months after the new president, President Trump, came in. And one of the things that I appreciated it the most, and I think people take for granted, is how important military members are regarding that switchover. How important military members are in ensuring that nucleus, that web of connectedness remains as those two members peacefully hand over power.
Right.
I mean, I don't think people really understand that there are hundreds of military members that work in the White House, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Army, that help maintain that connectivity, that continuity.
Yeah. I don't think the public, I wish millions of people would listen to this podcast, of course, so they could learn. But yeah, I don't think the general public, because you run into it all the time, especially when you get away, even more prevalent when you get away from Washington, D.C., and you talk to people and you start running into less and less and less people who've ever served in the military. So all they know about the military and the White House is Air Force One.
Yeah.
Maybe HMX One that he flies in a helicopter too, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
So that's as far as it goes. Don't have a clue, because there's just not a lot of public information out there. You are absolutely right. I felt the same, because I was fortunate to have the previous transition from President Bush to President Obama. But yeah, it was quite something to experience that and be part of that whole transition, the continuity of government from one administration to the next, and be a critical player in that.
What is the Coast Guard doing there? Like, besides being the butt of everyone's jokes in the water, what role are they playing there?
I think the Coast Guard plays a similar role to the rest of the service members. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine, they have communication specialists in the Coast Guard. They have culinary specialists in the Coast Guard. They have people who fly in the Coast Guard. They have administration personnel in the Coast Guard, medical personnel. So they can fill any of those specific roles. But I think, and going back to what Bo said, I think it's serving like you did and I did during a transition that is unique, because it opens you up to, I think, the beauty of our country. You get to be in that one moment, that one day, where you see where that small nucleus of power and the beauty of it lies, where that transition of power can be handed over to another person, and you sit there and you're watching and you're in awe.
Yeah.
That's
pretty
so
spectacular.
Cool. That's amazing.
It surely is. So Ty, I'm not going to give away toward the ending of your book, other than to tell people, Ty makes you emotional. You might cry. You might get all filled with love and all of that. And the way that Ty proposed to his wife, this is how I would, now having gone through the book, I would recommend that you go to the back and you learn and you see how Ty proposed to his wife, because that was amazing. And then go back to the beginning and see what turned Ty into that man. Because that is just something spectacular. So you got to read the book. People have got to go out there and buy it and read Ty's book. That is awesome, Ty. So before we started the podcast, Luke and I were talking about some different things, and we'd like to talk to you about it and get your opinion on what's happening in the world. You made a comment earlier about the Army, and I happen to agree with you very much about being such an amazing organization. It's incredibly diverse. There's equity and there's inclusion. I would say it's probably one of the best on the planet when it comes to all of those things, and giving every person opportunity, regardless of your background, where you come from, what your origin is, your race, your religious beliefs, your sexual orientation, whatever. The Army is one of those places where you can really prosper just based upon what you put into it and what you give to it, right? We're all turned from who we were into soldiers, and then you start out on an equal playing field as soldiers, and everybody moves forward, and it's pretty awesome. So, Luke, why don't you shoot with that first question that you had for Ty?
Oh, well, first, before we get into that, lay the pyramid project on me, man, because I think this will tee up kind of the questions that I have. So tell me all about that. Let it wash over me. Let's hear it.
Well, the pyramid project, that's my heart and soul. That's a nonprofit organization that my wife Sabrina and I thought up during the end of my military career, where me coming from the Mississippi Delta, coming from a low-income, underserved community, near the end of my career, I wanted to figure out a way, how can I give back? I've always known that I wanted to give back to my community. And what the military and the travel that I was afforded during my military career, how big of a role that played on me, I think the word exposure came to mind. You know, a lot of the stuff that I've had an opportunity to take to partake in, working in the White House, going to Georgetown, traveling the world, wouldn't have been possible had I not been exposed. And I think the military was the vehicle of that for me. I think, and coming up with the Pyramid Project, I wanted the word exposure to be the nucleus of it. And so what our goal is, we started with 5 boys from the Mississippi Delta back in 2016. And we brought them to Washington, D.C. for that specific experience, to have them in Washington, D.C. for a week. We exposed them to universities, lawyers, doctors, make them or take them to meet their elected officials, make their elected officials meet them. You work for them, so you're going to meet them. So, and we did that for a week. And then at the end of that week, we place them back, we take them back to their church or their community or their school. And for us, these kids between the ages of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, you've been exposed. And for lack of better words, you've been injected before you even graduate high school. When you graduate, now you don't graduate not having an idea what you want to do. You know, your flame doesn't get extinguished because you're so overwhelmed with everything that the world throws at you, because our feeling going into creating a program was that for the most part, kids do what people tell them to do. Yeah, they make mistakes, but that's what kids do. They make mistakes. They go to school, they listen to their parents, they do their homework, and they graduate. And then as adults, whereas in a society, we hand them a plate with all of this stuff on it and say, go win, go be successful. And they're overwhelmed, especially kids from underserved communities. That's not fair if they haven't been exposed adequately. And so we've grown from those 5 boys to now serving over 100 kids from 5-6 different states.
Wow.
Where we brought them to DC, and they stay on a college campus. We stayed on Georgetown University's main campus. We stayed on the American University's campus. We visited Howard University, Georgetown Law School. They visited all of their elected officials, sat down and had conversations with the Attorney General of the United States.
Nice.
So, and when they go home, it's amazing to hear back from them where they say, this changed my life. This is what I needed. You know, and you always see it in their eyes, and you see it. Some of them will start crying, you know, because they're so excited, you know, and they want to come and do it again. But that's what the Pyramid Project is about. It's about helping youth in low-income, underserved communities get access to that exposure that their counterparts in better resource communities get exposed to quicker than they do.
Are people able to donate to your organization?
Yes, people can donate to our organization at www.pyramidproject.org. Just go there and donate, and we appreciate anything that we can get. Any little bit helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Or even a little lot, like any executives from companies that are listening right now, pony up. Come on. It's a good cause.
Yeah, it's a fantastic cause. And that leads into a whole nother thing Luke and I have talked a lot about as well. So, so thank you for sharing that with us, Ty.
Thank you.
Luke, go forth and conquer.
I'm going to jump in. So since this is an audio podcast, I want to clarify a couple things that may seem obvious since we're on Zoom, but Bo and I are white men. Ty is a black man. So I just wanted to get that out there right now that, you know, what I'm about to delve into is good. So it's relevant for all the listeners. But what I'm wondering, Ty, is your opinion. So you've come from the freaking cotton fields, man, to sleeping in the White House is so unbelievable. But with everything that's going on right now, it's like we finally picked a wound that our country has had for a while, and now it's started to bleed, right? And it started with everything with George Floyd. Now you saw riots, and now people are starting to realize and really, they're really starting to pay attention to the fact that we have a giant socioeconomic problem in this country. And I mean, you talk about the low income and underserved communities. I feel like there's a lot of people out there, and I'm not saying that like there's no good or bad side to it. We're all people. And when we come to terms with that and we set everything aside, now we can say, all right, well, since we're all people, how do we help all of our brothers and sisters, no matter who they are? Right. And one of the biggest things that we're dealing with, because obviously I work for a pretty big company, Bo, you've run companies in the past, right, is a really hot topic now. We have a lot of executives and leaders that listen to our podcast. I'm noticing that their diversity and inclusion initiatives that they've had in the past are not enough. And now it's like they just hit a brick wall and they know it's absolutely not enough. One of the ideas that I had, and I want to have your take on this, because I think it has to come from both ways, from the companies, and then how do we better prepare, to your point, with exposure to the low income and underserved communities. But how do we actually make this a priority? One of the rules that I love that I want to bring up is the Rooney rule that they have in the NFL. Dan Rooney, the former owner of the Steelers, I believe, in Pittsburgh, he was head of diversity since the early 2000s, and he implemented a rule that out of all franchises in the NFL, you have to interview minority people for every leadership job that you have. The idea is that you don't have, there's no hiring quota. You can pick whoever you want to hire, the best person for the job. The idea behind it is you have to give somebody the opportunity to compete. And it's changed the face of leadership in the NFL today. And what would be your advice to, it's a two-part question, long question, but two-part question. What would you say to organizations and companies that are actually starting to say, you know what, cut the BS. If we're going to do something, let's do something impactful and actually do it now, or let's not do anything, right? Let's not put up an advertisement, right? And then not pay attention to it. Let's do something. What would you say to them? And then on the flip side of that, what can we all do to help people from low income and underserved communities? Because like, I'll throw it out there right now. If someone's interested in getting exposure in podcasting, sales, business, whatever it is, I'll donate my time 100%. Like, I don't care how many listeners call me. I absolutely will. But I want to turn it over to you because I think you're going to have a lot more to say about it than I will. So,
well, I'll thank you for that question. It's an amazing question and awesome question, and especially pertinent given the times that we're in right now. And I'll start with the last question first. Sure. What can we all do with regard to youth or people from low income communities, specifically youth, next generation, is to understand that they are a valuable resource that has not been tapped into. I mean, take my situation and a lot of kids like me who come from the Mississippi Delta. Today, a lot of kids are living in houses on dirt roads out in rural communities. And these kids don't have access to internet. They don't have internet access. They don't have access to a lot of other stuff. So what do they have to do? They're sitting at home reading, doing their homework. Brilliant, brilliant kids. And because we place this stigma on them, we stigmatize where they're from or who they are or what color they are. We overlook how valuable they are to society or what they can bring to an organization. These are brilliant, brilliant resources that are out there, and we have to tap into it. And that's one of the things that my organization tries to do, is tries to introduce these kids and introduce organizations to these youth. With regard to how organizations can play a better role, I think the first thing that organizations have to do is take diversity and inclusion seriously. Yep. Don't just assume because you paste it on your website or send it out in a company mail that we have a diversity and inclusion group, that that's not enough. Yep. Ask yourself as an organization. The term is that's going around today, and what's leading a lot of these movements is the term Black Lives Matter. Well, as an organization and organizational leadership, ask yourself, does Black Lives Matter enough for you to put Black people in leadership positions in your organization? If you are having these conversations, especially at the executive level, where you're interviewing people, if there's not a Black person in that interviewer role with you in that pool of people that's doing the interviewing, we've been conditioned to interview people differently, where you might have, and it's based off of a person's first name or based off the color of a person's skin, where you might look at one person and interview them and you try to find out all the good qualities in that person. All right, this is a good fit for our job. But we don't realize, and all people do it, we don't realize that when we see a person that may be from a different demographic, we see this person may be Black, our brain switches and we interview that person from a perspective where we're looking for things to disqualify the person.
Yep.
And I think leadership has to take ownership of that and say, you know what, we have to actively make ourselves interview people from an equal playing field, you know, and like the process that Bo and I went through in the military, where we physically sat down in front of a diverse group of command sergeant majors or first sergeant when we were getting promoted as enlisted guys, and we knew we were on an even playing field. And I think a lot of organizations, if they take that approach to asking, do Black Lives Matter enough for you to hire people in executive positions? If not, then you are not moving forward.
You're right.
If you can't make that decision, you are not only are you're not part of the solution, you're the problem. You know. So yeah. I think that's a big step that we can that organizations can make.
Yep. And Luke, can I add to that?
Yes.
If you don't mind, open conversation.
It is the Bo and Luke show. You know,
yeah. There you go. You know, when you talk about the NFL rule, is it the Rooney Rule?
The Rooney Rule.
The Rooney Rule on mandating that there are certain candidates, that there's a group of diverse candidates that have to be part of the candidate pool going for a position. When a rule like that is created and leadership enforces that rule, there's multiple levels in the impact of such a rule. And I think this is the important thing, even in the work that I do in leadership coaching and consulting, is when you're in that position as a company or as an organization and you have this issue and you're not interviewing the right type of candidates, you make that rule and you implement the rule. And then they start bringing in, they have to, right? They have to bring in a diverse group of candidates. Yeah. They have to. Well, that's surface level. And then what happens if, as the leaders commit to that and they keep doing that, you start to show the recruiting and the staffing folks that are actually going out and finding these candidates that what you want to see and what you want to drive the behavior is where it becomes natural, and that we have candidates, like Ty said, we have people everywhere. There are talent pools everywhere, right? There's talent in the Mississippi Delta, just as there's talent in New York City. Yep. There's talent everywhere, and you're trying to change those behaviors in your recruiters and the people going out and looking for candidates so that you get away from the, hey, yeah, this person's in my network and we don't need to interview anybody else. And most likely that person looks just like me. Right. Yeah. That's what's happening in corporate America. That is a big thing, big challenge for companies to overcome.
Well, I think what's happening now with this generation that we have now that's coming up is they're challenging corporations to do it differently. Yeah. And I think they're screaming and saying, hey, if you don't, we're going to make you pay. I mean, Facebook just now, Mark Zuckerberg just came out and changed some of his policies because of the ramifications of these voices. Look at these big organizations that are changing some of their policies because they hear this young generation saying, hey, look, time's up, we're coming. And either you listen to us or we're going to withhold our money from you, or we're going to make you pay in some way.
That's the biggest key is money. Yeah. And if there's one thing I hope people can take away, there's power of your pocketbook, and you want to force change as a consumer or an outsider. Just stop spending your money on their products and services if they're not willing and showing change.
Hey, hit them in the wallet.
Hit them in the wallet.
every time. And
Yeah.
it's just so annoying to me. Like because I watch a lot of TV now and stuff like that. I'm watching Hulu, right? I have a 7-month-old baby, so there's a lot of TV
Congratulations.
watching thank you, man, while he's hanging out, and so I see like all these look, ad agencies and giant companies have alarmingly fast just jumped on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all of these commercials that are supposed to be, like really profound and things like that. And I get creating awareness, and maybe it's because I'm just getting older, but to me, like, I almost don't give a crap about their words. I'm like, I'd rather see them just have a blank screen with writing on it that says
Mm-hmm.
what they're going to do to change other people's lives with the billions of dollars that they have. And it doesn't have to be huge. The Rooney Rule is, I mean, just an example of saying, hey, we're going to give everybody a chance to compete. We have 30,000 employees, and maybe we can impact the lives of 10,000 people by
Yeah.
doing that. That's big.
Yeah.
That could be huge.
I think you hit the nail on the head where you said that you don't care what I don't want to see you talk about what you agree with, and when you're talking about the organizations, you hit the nail on the head, because instead of them saying, well, I agree that Black Lives Matter, or I agree that we should do this, what people want to hear, or what we want to hear is, okay, you don't agree, you agree with me, but what are you doing next? What's the
Yeah.
action step? What
Yeah.
what
Right.
what are you doing within your organization, within yourself individually, to make sure that we deal with the education inequality in our country, or make sure that we deal with moving forward on equal access to justice, or to make sure that you deal with poverty in not only Mississippi but in Republican states like West Virginia.
Yeah.
We're the richest country in the world, and you mean to tell me that we can't fix poverty? Come on.
Unbelievable.
Come on. That
Unbelievable.
should piss everybody off, and it especially pisses me off a lot when we have politicians that
Yeah.
are sitting there and they can't figure it out. My own opinion is that if you've been in office for 20 something years and you haven't been able to figure it out, you don't need to be in office.
That's right.
You don't need to be in office, and that's what I challenge people to do. Run.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
true.
I don't care if they're popular in your district or in the Senate or the House. I don't care how popular they are. If they've been sitting there for decades and some of these issues haven't been fixed, they should have a ton of people running against them. I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican, don't matter. If you got a solution to the problem, I'm behind you.
Yep.
Get out if you can't fix it.
And we're
Yeah.
not even talking about that big of a portion of in the grand scheme of things. It seems like a big portion of the population, but it's really not. So let me explain myself on this. So we look at, I think 13% of the population in the United States is Black. Well, that's the population, every man, woman, and child, no matter how old they are. The problem is what the workforce is doing and the opportunities that they're giving those people. So let's take half of them and just take them off the bat because they're not at the age where they can work. Either they're too old or they're too young. Really, we're talking about what, 6% of the population, maybe. Not like we're saying, hey, there's nothing we can do about it. It's half the people. It's not. It's just
And when you say stuff like that, when you break it down like that, then you have to ask yourself, okay, is it that the problem can't be fixed, or is it that the problem that people are unwilling to fix it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
I really believe it's the latter. One of the things Luke and I we had started writing a letter, open letter to Congress, the president, and when this is all coming, it's time for change. And when we talked about it, like, okay, we have to offer, it's like you said earlier, Ty, it's like, I can't just give you my agreement, right? What are some solutions and things our elected officials could actually start going after to make change, right? So one of the things we looked at, and I would love your opinion on this, years and years and decades ago, political boundaries and lines are drawn, and you end up with the poverty-stricken areas almost, I think it goes back decades, almost purposely, right? We put this group of voters over here and there, and this is the group that are low income. It's the area that's underprivileged and so forth. And you look at those areas today, And one of the things Luke and I talked about was no child decides where they're born, right? Who their parents are, what political or school district they were born to, or they get to go to school in. That child is set up just by where they're born, and what type of education they're going to get, right? Well, those dollars that support the school budget are local dollars, local tax dollars. So, okay, now things, that's just not going to add up, right?
Yeah.
So you're in a poor area, you're going to have less money coming in from a tax base. That's less of a school budget, right? Only so much is going to come in from the state. So what is that education system like for that child? It's horrendous. It can be horrendous, right?
And I think the whole everything that you just said goes back to the beginning where you said it's purpose. It was purposeful.
It was purposeful.
When you take a look at redlining, when you take a look at segregated schools, when you take a look at the quality of healthcare in certain communities, all of that was purposeful. And right now we're dealing with the fact that we haven't dealt with it.
Right. Exactly.
That we have not sat down and had a frank and honest conversation about what was purposely done. And we haven't dealt with it. And I think right now we are in the beginnings of dealing with it. I think a lot of people underestimate how young this country is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not a very old country.
It's not a very old country. No. And it's only until you get out of this country, like you and I have done, and you've lived in foreign countries where those countries are old.
Yeah.
But millennium old, right?
Yeah.
So Luke and I said, so now is the time we have to be purposeful to fix it.
We do.
Right. So we looked very simply, and this is like, it's like, okay, there's low hanging fruit that we could really start with and start going after this. It's like, got it. All your school systems, you have a budget. That's what you have. That's based on your tax base. We're not going to increase taxes or nothing like that. That's what you have. And then you have schools that have very high tax base, like Northern Virginia, some very wealthy counties, and they have bigger budgets, and you start getting you can start all of its public data on what the per pupil per year budget is for that school district. So Northern Virginia, it's something around $17,000 or $18,000 a year per child. But then you go into someplace like a West Virginia or in the Mississippi Delta, or just pick any of those, and it comes down and it's around $6,500, $7,000, depending on the area. All right. Then you have this great big federal department called the Department of Education, and they have, when we looked at, was it, Luke, like a $60 billion a year budget.
Yeah.
All right. You're the federal government. You're not in charge of schools. The states are in charge of schools, right? So your department exists. You have a $60 billion budget. I have an idea. How about we take the top 20 schools and we figure out, or districts, from a budget perspective, not just from a budget, say this is the average budget per pupil. And then whatever that delta is, or what that average is, you then go to all of the underprivileged schools and you say, oh, you're $4,000 a year below the average. We're going to give that school district $4,000 per child in that school district on top of their local based budget. Yeah. And that will increase books, new textbooks, make sure there's heat and there's air conditioning and teachers are paid, and increase the education level of those children in those communities to start fostering the opportunity, and like you're doing with your project, and showing them what's out there for them, the potential. We're just like, man, that's just one thing. It is one thing.
You're talking about, you talk about these, the statistics and the numbers behind it. When you break it down like that, Bo, you're not talking 13%. You're talking about like 2% of the black, of the total population, or the black kids that are in school right now. We're talking, well, I mean, I'm not that incredible at math, but we're talking what, 6 million people ish. That is nothing.
And you're right. It's a low hanging fruit. And then it brings us back to that whole question of, is it intentional, or it's not intentional, but is it fixable, or is it that people just don't want to fix it? And I think going to what you said about making sure that these schools, these communities get the amount of resources that they should have. And that's part of fixing that foundational problem.
Yeah.
Spreading the wealth, making sure that low income, underserved communities are adequately resourced from a financial perspective. And I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it from an educational perspective is something that's tough for our country to do, is we have to start teaching our kids about our country's history.
Yeah.
That's a hard conversation to have. That is a very difficult conversation to have, because it has to be honest with our kids about what we've gone through to get to the country that we have. We have a very powerful country, but we have to tell our kids what we went through in order to get here. And that includes slavery, that includes Jim Crow, that includes Reconstruction, that includes the civil rights era, that includes all of that stuff. Unless Black kids and white kids learn that stuff, we're going to end up in this same place a few generations from now, because they're not going to understand where we came from and how we got here. And they're not going to understand why certain segments of the population rightfully have animosity. So that's another part of the equation that we have to address. If we truly, and I'll say it, if we truly love America and we want America to move forward.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah,
we could make, I mean, any of us that are actually want to be purposeful about the change, about making change, we could easily make a list of what are those top things that we have got to get after and start changing in an impactful way, right? So that it does. We always talk about it. All the politicians talk about it. It's all the propaganda on the TV about a better future for the next generations. Well, you got to stop talking about it and do something about it.
Like Janet Jackson said in her song, "What have you done for me lately?"
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
That's right. And I think people are approaching this conversation and this topic by being so defensive on both sides. I feel like the first thing that needs to happen is we just need to disarm each other at this conversation, because how every conversation in the news and on like the streets that I'm seeing right now is going, like, not that I'm on the streets all the time or in the middle of a quarantine, but here's how it normally goes, right? Is the Black community saying, look, we're underserved, we're in low income communities, and I'm defensive because of that. White people are coming in and saying, well, I wasn't responsible for any of that, right? I didn't do any of that. So why are you blaming me? That was my answer. I had nothing to do with that, you know? And that we're starting from a really defensive standpoint where if we just said it at the same time, we said, whoa, hold on. We're being defensive for no reason here. Can we just both agree that there's a problem? I think both sides would say, yeah, I agree there's a problem. And if we can get to the point where we say, hey, what collectively are we going to do about this without becoming defensive? Maybe that'd be step one.
I think where we have to start at is understanding and accepting that the conversation is going to hurt.
Yep.
It's going to be a painful conversation. It's going to be an emotional, painful conversation for Black folks. And it's going to be an emotional and painful conversation for people who aren't of color, you know, to have. But we are Americans and we have to have this conversation.
Yes.
We are right now where young people are screaming at is the soul of this country. You know what I mean? And what's going on out in the street. So those difficult conversations we must have, and we have to understand that there are going to be people with diverging opinions. People who feel like, okay, you're pointing a finger at me and you said I did all this. Well, I don't think that's the case. I know that's not the case, where Black people are saying that white people today did something to them. What I think a lot of people, well, me personally, I can't speak for everyone else, are saying is there's a history here where something happened, slavery, to Black people. They have never been made whole. Generation after generation after generation. I mean, there are policies and programs that have been put in place, but from a judicial perspective, from an equal justice perspective, from an equal access to education perspective, from a healthcare perspective, Black people have not been made whole like some other groups that have gone through atrocities in this country were at some point made whole. And I think that's what a lot of people are. That's the foundation of a lot of this, I think.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I had a great conversation, and it was an eye-opening conversation for one of my new clients that I'm coaching, and it's a business executive, company owner, and and it wasn't to do with her, but we were just talking about insurance as a whole and how in every aspect of business, and you're thinking about, and Luke brought this up earlier, diversity and equity and inclusion, and the middle word there, equity, is so important, right? And this is how it affects the low income wage earners, which can be, depending on your community, it can be predominantly a Black community. It can be Hispanic or Asian community and you're in a poorer area where there's not a big business base, but these businesses they exist and people are working and they might be making minimum wage, and it's mostly minority workers in certain locations. And then they have the business owner says, yes, we're going to offer benefits. And there are some people in the business who make middle-class income. And we say, Ty, our annual premium for your medical insurance is $10,000 a year. The company's going to pay $7,000. So we are in compliance with the Affordable Care Act, right? But that means you have to pay $3,000 a year. Well, what happens if you only make $15,000 or $18,000 a year? Yeah. And now $3,000 of that, which is a lot of money, right? You're talking 25%, right, of your income is now going towards just your medical insurance, not your dental, not your vision, just your medical insurance. And you have a family, right? And you have kids. But the manager makes $40,000 a year. And the manager has to pay $3,000. Yeah. That $3,000 is a little more doable for the manager. So when you talk about equity and how do you make that equitable, you create a scale. If you make above a certain amount of money, you pay the full premium, the full $3,000. If you make below a certain amount of money, right, you pay half, maybe you pay $1,000, right? And that's how you make an equitable system for those types of things in your company. I'm telling you, most companies don't do that. Even the big companies don't do that. So the people in the mailroom, the drivers, the warehouse workers, the mailroom workers, they have a family, they're married, they have 3 kids at home, and they need insurance just as much as the CEO needs insurance for his family. Nobody wants to get stuck with tens of thousands of dollars in potential medical bills, or if you have a baby and it's a $25,000 event, but they're not looking at those things in a holistic approach to say, this is not equitable.
Yeah. And even to add a little color to it, and even to add a little picture to it, my father was the only breadwinner in our house. Yeah. And he had 4 people to take care of off of less than $20,000 a year. Yeah. Less than $20,000 a year. And that's when I was growing up. Today, there are still families. I know people in the Mississippi Delta who are making less than $20,000 a year trying to raise a family in 2020.
Yeah. That's something.
It is. It's absolutely amazing. And then especially when you take into account how Black people have to navigate the healthcare system. You know, Black women are more likely to die during childbirth today by multiple times. They're more likely to die during childbirth. And one of the interesting things is the higher educated Black women get, the more likely they are to die. So the average Black, yes, a lot of people don't know that. Yes. The average Black woman is more likely to die during childbirth than a white woman or a non-Black woman. A Black woman with a PhD is more likely to die than that. And it's a weird thing that's going on. And we don't take that into account when we are dealing with the healthcare system. And I think that goes to exactly what Bo was saying, with people making so little money and having to try to balance and output so much in order to just get taken care of.
Wow.
It's deep. Yeah. It's deep. And there's a lot of those types of conversations and solutions that have to get put in place in order to even start to fix it. Yep. Right. At another conversation,
we have to start.
Yeah. We have to start.
We have to start. We have to start. We have to have conversations like this on shows like yours, where the conversation is frank and people are honest about what they're feeling.
Yeah. The days of being able to go into a company and give a week-long training class on diversity, equity, and inclusion are done. If you're spending money on that, you're wasting your money. You need to take that money, add some more to it, and do some real programmatic change
Mm-hmm.
in all aspects of how you're running your business.
But I think one of the regarding that, I think one of the additional things that corporations can do is instead of lobbying Congress for initiatives that benefit your corporation monetarily, lobby Congress for initiatives that address diversity and inclusion. You know,
Mm-hmm.
corporations can do that as well. You know,
Yeah.
if you have the time and the money and you're doing it for that specific reason, lobby Congress to do it as well.
Yeah, here's another one for you. When you talking about Congress, I would love to see this happen. So, yeah, you have a rule in companies, especially in government contractors. It's the Equal Employment Opportunity -1, the EEO-1 report.
Mm-hmm.
So companies have to file this EEO-1 report every year with the Department of Labor.
Mm-hmm.
And the report breaks down across certain categories across the company by race, veteran status, disability status, how many you have in your company by those categories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about this the other day. I'm like, okay, why don't we really make this real and worthwhile and make that report, number one, reportable by all companies, say 50 or more employees, same like with the Affordable Care Act. If you're 50 or more employees, you have to submit this report. And oh, by the way, you can't just submit one report that's for your company.
Mm-hmm.
You need to submit it by department within your company.
Mm.
Everybody who has a weight or a position of power or authority to do hiring decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to do it by department.
Yeah.
And then you can have a cumulative at the end. And oh, by the way, it needs to include every department in the federal government.
Transparency.
And transparency,
Mm-hmm.
full transparency.
Yeah.
And look and see what you find.
Mm-hmm.
And then make plans to make mandates to put change in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Transparency builds trust.
And transparency builds trust. Publicize it.
Yeah.
Make it public data, not
Mm-hmm.
something that's just between the organization and the Department of Labor.
Mm-hmm.
Make it public data. Make it just like you can look up the census data. Make it
Mm-hmm.
public data.
Yeah.
Make them report that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway,
I'm in.
I get frustrating because you want to see the change happen faster.
It is. Yeah. But I like one of the things that Obama said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, and I think he got it from Martin Luther King, where he says change it doesn't happen. It's not a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you go left, sometimes you go right, sometimes you take a few steps back, you know, but in the long run, you know, you're making progress if you keep at it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like the gentleman in the cotton field when you were ready to quit.
Yep.
You got to pick you up and get up and keep going.
Yeah,
Let's
keep
go.
moving. Yeah,
Gotta keep
absolutely.
moving. Awesome, man. Awesome. Ty, we have taken up a lot of your time here recording this episode. We sincerely appreciate it. Luke, you have any follow-on questions for Ty?
Man, I really don't. But Ty, thanks so much for being on here, man. My I don't know, my heart is full. It's congrats on your entire journey. And your graduation from law school. That's the most amazing thing that I've ever heard. So I still have time to go I dropped out of college, but you know, if I just follow the Ty Pinkins, I have enough time to go back, get my undergrad and graduate from law school.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, go for it, man. And thank you guys for inviting me on. It's been an awesome, great conversation. I've enjoyed every moment of it. So thanks. I appreciate it a lot.
Oh, you're most welcome. So you got to take the show out. We end all of our shows with the phrase, "That's a wrap." Mm-hmm. So give the audience your final pitch, how they can find you, your book, and end it all with, "That's a wrap."
Okay. You can find me at typinkins.com. My handle is at Ty Pinkins on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. That's at Ty Pinkins. You can donate to the Pyramid Project at www.pyramidproject.org, and that's a wrap.